What happens when the life you meticulously built to prove you'd won crumbles in a single evening? Ethan Cole thought he had it all, a thriving career, a beautiful young fiancée on his arm, and the smug satisfaction of leaving his ordinary ex-wife in the dust. He brought his new life to a friend's weddings, ready to flaunt his success. But he walked into a reality he could never have imagined. The woman he'd cast aside as not being good enough was there, radiant and transformed. And the man by her side wasn't just a new husband. He was Damien Blackwood, a name whispered with reverence in circles of unimaginable wealth and power. This isn't just a story of an awkward encounter. It's a story about the deafening echo of past choices and the brutal revelation that the game you thought you were winning had a different, much richer player all along. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden fingers across the rolling hills of Napa Valley. It was the kind of impossibly perfect day that felt scripted, a backdrop worthy of the exorbitant price tag Ethan knew his friends Oliver and Jessica had paid for their wedding venue. The air at the Sterling Peak vineyard was thick with the scent of ripening grapes and expensive perfume. Ethan Cole adjusted the knot of his silk tie, a self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Beside him, Brittany smoothed down her form-fitting champagne-colored dress, her diamond engagement ring catching the light and scattering tiny rainbows across the cobblestone path. "Isn't this just divine, darling?" Brittany whispered, her voice a practiced melody of social grace. "Jessica has such exquisite taste. I'm already taking notes for our big day." Ethan squeezed her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "Only the best for you, of course. But let's be honest, our wedding will make this look like a quaint little get-together." It was a boast, and they both knew it, but it was the currency their relationship was built on. Aspirational, competitive, and relentlessly public. At 38, Ethan had curated his life with the precision of a master artist. He was a senior VP at a rapidly growing financial tech firm, drove a slate grey Porsche, and lived in a minimalist penthouse overlooking the city. Brittany, a decade his junior, and a popular lifestyle influencer, was the final perfect brushstroke on his canvas of success. She was beautiful, vivacious, and just as invested in appearances as he was. She was everything he often reminded himself that his ex-wife, Sophia, was not. The thought of Sophia was a fleeting, sepia-toned memory. She was from a different chapter of his life, a chapter he had decisively closed 5 years ago. Sophia was quiet, academic content, with simple things, a walk in the park, a night in, with a classic film, a well-loved paperback. In his 20s, he'd mistaken her quiet strength for a lack of ambition. As his own career began to ascend, he grew to see her contentment as a weight, an anchor, holding him to a life of mediocrity. The divorce had been his idea, a clean, sharp break he'd framed as a necessary step in his evolution. He had to shed his old skin to grow. Sophia, he'd reasoned, was that old skin. He hadn't seen or heard from her since the papers were signed. He'd heard through the grapevine she'd moved away from the city, back to some small, forgettable town. He pictured her in a small house, maybe working at a local library or a community college, living the same simple, unambitious life she'd always craved. The thought didn't bring him guilt, but a faint, condescending pity. It reinforced his belief that he'd made the right choice. He'd escaped. "Ethan, Brittany, you made it." Oliver the groom clapped Ethan on the back, his face flushed with champagne and happiness. "Glad you could find the place. Get a drink, Mingle. We're about to get this show on the road." They navigated the manicured lawn, collecting flutes of champagne from a passing waiter. The crowd was a predictable mix of college friends and business associates. Ethan was in his element, exchanging handshakes and air kisses, making effortless small talk about market trends and vacation spots. Brittany was a natural extension of him, laughing at the right moments, her eyes sparkling, a perfect advertisement for the life he provided. "Did you see the guest list?" Brittany murmured, leaning in close. I heard Damien Blackwood is here. The Damien Blackwood. Can you imagine? Ethan's brow furrowed. Damien Blackwood was a semi-reclusive tech visionary who had sold his AI software company for a sum that was spoken of in mythological terms. He was a ghost, a name on the cover of business magazines, not someone who showed up at the weddings of normal people like Oliver and Jessica. No way, Ethan scoffed. Oliver knows people, but he doesn't know people on that level. It's just a rumor. Well, keep your eyes peeled, Brittany said, her gaze already scanning the crowd with a predator's focus. An introduction could be life-changing. The gentle chime of a bell called the guests to their seats for the ceremony. They found their assigned places in the third row, the white chairs arranged in a gentle curve, facing an archway, draped in white roses and eucalyptus. Ethan settled into his seat, feeling a familiar sense of pride. This was his world now. These were his people. He had earned his place here. As the string quartet began to play, a soft, elegant prelude, a couple moved to take their seats in the front row, their backs to him. The man was tall, with distinguished silver at his temples, and a suit so perfectly tailored, it seemed to have been woven onto his frame. The woman beside him wore a deep emerald green dress, a simple, elegant column of silk that clung to her figure in a way that was both modest and breathtaking. Her dark hair was swept up in a graceful chignon, exposing the delicate line of her neck and a pair of stunning, understated diamond earrings. There was something about her posture, a quiet confidence in the set of her shoulders, that snagged Ethan's attention. It was familiar, yet completely alien. The woman turned slightly to murmur something to her companion, and the afternoon sun caught her profile. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly slick and heavy. The air, just moments ago filled with the sweet scent of roses, now seemed thin and unbreathable. His carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. It couldn't be. But it was. It was Sophia. She looked different, profoundly different. The quiet, bookish woman he remembered was gone. In her place was a woman of poise and elegance, a woman who looked as if she belonged in the front row of this opulent ceremony as effortlessly as she breathed. The 5 years that had passed hadn't aged her. They had refined her, carving away her youthful uncertainty and leaving behind a stunning self-possessed grace. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the impossibility. What was she doing here? And who was the man beside her? An old friend? A new boyfriend? He felt a strange, unwelcome prickle of possessiveness. He watched as the man leaned in his hand, resting gently on the small of her back, a gesture of easy intimacy that sent a jolt of pure, irrational anger through Ethan. Brittany, oblivious, leaned over. See, I told you. That's him. That's Damien Blackwood. Who is he with? She's beautiful, but I don't recognize her at all. The name hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. Damien Blackwood. He stared at the man's back at the quiet authority he projected, even when seated at the way Sophia leaned into him, a small, trusting smile on her face. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, deafening clang. The ceremony began. The bride walked down the aisle. Vows were exchanged. But Ethan saw none of it. His entire focus was locked on the woman in the emerald dress, his ex-wife. The simple, unambitious woman he had discarded, sitting in the front row with a billionaire. And on her left hand, catching the sun with a fire that dwarfed Brittany's diamond, was a ring, a wedding ring. The world swam back into focus with the sound of applause. Oliver and Jessica were walking back up the aisle, beaming as guests showered them with rose petals. Ethan stood mechanically clapping along with everyone else, but his eyes were fixed on the front row. Sophia and Damien Blackwood were standing now, and as they turned, Ethan got a full unobstructed view. Sophia's eyes, the same warm, intelligent eyes he remembered, swept over the crowd. For a heart-stopping second, they met his. There was no shock in them, No anger, no flicker of surprise. Just a brief, cool acknowledgement, as if he were a distant acquaintance she barely recalled. Then her gaze moved on, settling on Damien with a warmth and affection that made Ethan's stomach clench. It was the look she used to give him. "Let's go to the cocktail hour," Brittany said, tugging at his arm, her voice buzzing with excitement. "I absolutely have to meet them." "No," Ethan said, the word coming out sharper than he intended. Brittany looked at him surprised. "What do you mean? No, Ethan. This is Damien Blackwood. This is a networking opportunity from the gods." "We'll see," he muttered, trying to regain control. His mind was a chaotic storm of questions. How? When? Why hadn't anyone told him he had mutual friends with Sophia, people who had been at this very wedding? Had they all known? Was he the last to find out the subject of some grand cosmic joke? He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Robert, a friend from his college days and one of the groomsmen. "Ethan, man, good to see you," Robert said, his smile a little too tight. "Crazy, right?" "Crazy what?" Ethan asked, playing dumb, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Robert gestured vaguely towards the front row. "Sophia, looking like $1,000,000. Or, well, a few billion bucks, I guess." He chuckled nervously. "Who would have thought?" The casual confirmation sent another wave of disbelief through Ethan. "You knew." "Well, yeah, man. We all knew. She and Damien have been together for about 3 years, married for the last year. He's a great guy, totally devoted to her." Robert seemed to sense Ethan's shock. "Look, I figured you knew. I didn't want to be the one to, you know." He didn't know. He had been so wrapped up in his own curated success story, so certain of Sophia's quiet, unremarkable future, that the possibility of this reality had never even entered his mind. He had been a fool. The crowd moved towards the grand terrace overlooking the vineyards for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Ethan followed, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. Brittany, sensing a story, but not its protagonist, was relentless. "So you do know her?" She pressed her voice, a mix of curiosity and accusation. "The woman with Damien Blackwood. You looked like you saw a ghost." Ethan took a long sip of his champagne, the bubbles doing nothing to calm his nerves. "She's my ex-wife." Brittany stopped dead in her tracks. Her perfectly made-up face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a sharp, calculating anger. Your ex-wife? The one you said was a librarian from a small town?" Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss. "I thought she was," he said lamely. "I hadn't heard anything." "So, the simple, unambitious woman you left so you could build a real life is now married to one of the richest men in the world." The sarcasm in her voice was a razor blade. "You have got to be kidding me." Before Ethan could formulate a defense, the moment he had been dreading arrived. Oliver and Jessica were making their rounds, and they were walking directly towards them, with Sophia and Damien in tow. There was no escape. "Ethan, Brittany, so glad you're here," Jessica said, her bridal glow undiminished. "I'm not sure if you two have met our dear friends Damien and Sophia." Ethan's throat went dry. He was face to face with her now. Up close, she was even more striking. The simple dress was clearly couture, the material impossibly fine. Her skin glowed with health and happiness. She looked serene, untroubled, and completely out of his league. "Sophia." He managed his voice, sounding strangled to his own ears. "It's been a long time." "Ethan," she replied, her tone polite and even. There was no lingering bitterness, which was somehow more insulting than if she had slapped him. She gave him a small, closed-mouth smile. "You remember my ex-husband, Ethan Cole, darling," she said, turning to Damien. Damien Blackwood extended a hand. His handshake was firm, his eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to see right through Ethan's facade. He wasn't classically handsome in the way a movie star was, but he possessed an aura of quiet, unshakable power that was far more intimidating. "A pleasure to meet you," Damien said, his voice a calm, deep baritone. There was no hint of animosity or triumph in his tone. He was simply stating a fact. "And this must be your fiancée," Sophia said, her gaze shifting to Brittany. Her eyes took in the expensive dress, the large ring, the tense posture, with a neutral, almost analytical calm. "Brittany, is it? Jessica has told me so much about your blog. It sounds fascinating." The comment was perfectly polite, yet it landed like a subtle jab. To Sophia, married to a man who shaped global technology, a lifestyle blog must have seemed like a child's hobby. Brittany, to her credit, recovered quickly, plastering on her influencer smile. "Sophia, it's an honor, and Mr. Blackwood, I'm a huge admirer of your work. Please call me Damien," he said, his attention already returning to his wife. He placed a hand on her back again, the proprietary gesture a clear, unspoken statement. The conversation was a masterpiece of social awkwardness. Ethan felt like an insect under a microscope. Every word he said sounded foolish. Every glance he stole at Sophia felt like a confession of his own monumental error in judgment. He tried to talk about his work, but the words financial tech turned to ash in his mouth when speaking to a man who had practically invented the future. He watched the way Damien looked at Sophia with a mixture of adoration and profound respect. He would listen intently when she spoke, his head tilted slightly, as if her words were the only thing that mattered in the world. Ethan had never looked at her that way. He had listened to her, sure, but always with half an ear, already thinking about his next meeting, his next goal, his next rung on the ladder. He had seen her as a supporting character in his story. He realized now with sickening clarity that he had been nothing but a prologue in hers. The group was mercifully broken up by another guest pulling Damien away to ask about a charitable foundation he ran. As he excused himself, he gave Sophia's hand a gentle squeeze. "I'll be right back, my love." My love. The words echoed in Ethan's skull. For a brief, terrible moment, he was alone with Sophia and Brittany. The air crackled with unspoken history. "You look well, Sophia," Ethan said, the platitude feeling hollow and stupid. "I am well, Ethan. Thank you," she replied. "Napa suits you." It was a dismissal, a polite closing of the door. She then turned her full attention to Brittany. "It was lovely to meet you, Brittany. I hope you both enjoy the evening." And with that, she turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with an effortless grace to rejoin her husband, leaving Ethan and Brittany standing in the wreckage of their perfect afternoon. Brittany's eyes were like chips of ice. "A librarian," she seethed under her breath, her voice trembling with fury. "You told me you left a librarian." The rest of the cocktail hour was a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. Ethan felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He wasn't just Ethan Cole, senior VP, anymore. He was now the ex-husband, a walking, talking historical artifact from Sophia Blackwood's previous lesser life. The whispers were subtle at first, a shift in tone when he approached a group, a quick glance exchanged between old friends. But he could feel them like a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. He and Brittany stood near the edge of the terrace, a gulf of silence between them. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and violet, but the beauty of the scene was lost on Ethan. His mind was replaying the last decade, but this time the footage was corrupted. The narrative he had so carefully constructed of his bold escape from a life of suffocating mediocrity was dissolving into a pathetic tale of a man who'd mistaken a diamond for a common stone and thrown it away. He overheard a fragment of conversation from a nearby group that included some of Jessica's bridesmaids. "Can you even imagine? He left her," one woman said, her voice dripping with incredulity. "I heard he told people she had no drive. Look at her now." She's on the board of 3 non-profits, and Damien says she has the sharpest mind for philanthropic investment he's ever seen. He's with that influencer girl, right? Another chimed in. The one who posts pictures of her avocado toast. It's like trading in a classic Rolls-Royce for a rented scooter. The women shared a laugh, oblivious or indifferent to the fact that Ethan was standing 10 feet away. The comparison hit him like a physical blow. A rented scooter. He looked at Brittany, who was furiously typing on her phone, probably composing a passive-aggressive social media post. Her beauty, which had once been his proudest acquisition, now seemed shallow, one-dimensional. Her ambition, which he'd seen as a match for his own, now felt like a desperate scramble for validation through likes and shares. He needed a stronger drink. Excusing himself, he made his way to the bar, his path taking him past a table where Damien and Sophia were seated with an older couple. Sophia was laughing a genuine, uninhibited laugh that he hadn't heard in years. It was a sound he once thought he owned, a sound he had muted with his constant pressure, his subtle criticisms, his overarching belief that her contentment was a flaw. Damien was watching her, not with the blind adoration of a besotted fool, but with the deep, appreciative gaze of a man who understood her true worth. Ethan saw it then. Damien hadn't just given Sophia a life of luxury. He had given her the space to become the person she was always meant to be. The confidence, the poise, the elegance, it wasn't bought with Blackwood's money. It had been inside her all along, and Ethan had been too blind and too arrogant to see it. He remembered their arguments in the final year of their marriage. "Why can't you just be happy with what we have, Ethan?" she had asked him, once, her voice laced with a weary sadness. They were in their small apartment, the one he'd despised for its lack of a view. "We have a good life." "This isn't a good life, Sophia. It's a starting point," he had retorted, gesturing around the room with contempt. "I want more. For us. Don't you want more?" "I want a partner," she had said quietly, "not a business plan." He hadn't understood her then. He'd seen her words as a weakness, a refusal to engage with his vision of success. Now he saw it was a plea for him to see her, to value what they had beyond its monetary or status potential. He had failed completely. He got his drink, a double Scotch neat, and found a quiet corner to stand alone. The reflection in the large glass window showed a man in an expensive suit who looked lost and small. The wedding reception was moving into the main hall, a grand cathedral-like room with exposed wooden beams and glittering chandeliers. Music started to drift out, a live band playing a smooth jazz standard. Brittany found him, her anger having cooled into a brittle, strategic calm. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low. "Not here, Brittany." "Yes, here. Now," she insisted. "You lied to me. You didn't just lie, you created a completely false narrative about your past. The simple librarian. Was any of it true? It was my perception of it." He defended weakly. "When we were married, she was what? Not yet married to a billionaire." Brittany's eyes were hard. "This changes things, Ethan. This changes everything. Do you know how humiliating this is for me? People are looking at me, then looking at her. They're making comparisons, and I'm coming out on the losing end. Our brand, my brand, is built on aspiration, on having the best. And you, my fiancé, are the man who let the best get away." The word brand grated on him. Was that all they were? A brand? A carefully marketed image of success. He looked from Brittany's furious face to the entrance of the hall where Sophia and Damien were being greeted warmly by the bride's parents. There was nothing performative about them. They were just two people, deeply in love, moving through the world with a quiet confidence that made Ethan's ostentatious life feel like a cheap imitation. "I need some air," he said, turning and walking away from her, away from the music and the laughter and the crushing weight of his own stupidity. He found himself on a small, secluded balcony overlooking the rows of grapevines stretching out like dark ribbons under the moonlight. The cool night air did little to clear his head. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the bars were forged from his ego. He had always seen his life as a constant upward trajectory. Leaving Sophia was a necessary sacrifice for that climb. He had convinced himself that she was happy in her small world, and he was happy in his large one. But seeing her tonight so radiant and powerful in her own right, he understood the profound nature of his miscalculation. He hadn't climbed out of a valley, but he had been standing on a mountain, mistaken it for a foothill, and leapt willingly into a chasm, convincing himself all the way down that he was flying. And now, at the bottom, he was finally looking up, seeing the person he left behind, silhouetted against the stars, in a place he could now never hope to reach. The scotch did little to numb the turmoil in Ethan's mind. It only sharpened the edges of his regret, honing it into a fine point of resentment. He couldn't stand it any longer. The whispers, the pitying looks, the sight of Sophia living a life that should have been in some twisted way a lesser version of his own. He needed to talk to her. He needed to understand. He needed to puncture the serene, perfect bubble that surrounded her. He left the balcony and re-entered the reception hall. The band was playing a more upbeat tune now, and some couples were on the dance floor. He scanned the room, his eyes finding Sophia almost immediately. She was standing near the towering wedding cake speaking with Jessica. Damien was nowhere in sight. This was his chance. As he approached, a waiter offered him another glass of champagne. He took it, downing half of it in one go. Liquid courage. Jessica saw him coming, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before her bridal training kicked in. "Ethan, are you enjoying yourself?" she asked brightly. "Immensely," he lied. "Jessica, could I possibly borrow Sophia for just a moment? An old friend wanting to say a proper hello?" Jessica glanced nervously at Sophia, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, I need to go find my husband anyway. Don't let him have too much cake before we cut it." She bustled off, leaving an unnerving silence in her wake. "What do you want, Ethan?" Sophia asked. Her voice was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth. It was the voice one uses for a necessary but unpleasant task. I wanted to talk," he began, gesturing vaguely. "This is all a bit of a shock." "I imagine it is," she said, her expression unreadable. "You always did like to be the most successful person in the room." The comment was so astute, so surgically precise, that it caught him off guard. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" she replied, a single eyebrow arching slightly. "You left me because my lack of ambition was holding you back. You painted me as a small person, destined for a small life, so that your decision to leave would look like a heroic leap towards greatness. Don't deny it. It's the story you told yourself, and I'm sure it's the story you've told everyone else." He was speechless. She had dissected his entire motivation in a few calm sentences. "It wasn't like that," he stammered, the lie tasting foul. I was young. I didn't know what I wanted." "Oh, I think you knew exactly what you wanted," she countered, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "You wanted applause. You wanted a life that looked good on paper. You wanted a partner who was an accessory, not a person. I was never going to be that for you." A surge of his old arrogance flared up, a desperate defense mechanism. "And this is better. This life, following a billionaire around the world. Is this your ambition?" He wanted to hurt her, to imply she was a gold digger, to bring her down to a level where he could understand her. But Sophia didn't flinch. "You think this is about Damien's money, don't you?" She gave a small, sad shake of her head. "That's your tell, Ethan. You can only see the world through the lens of status and wealth. You can't possibly comprehend anything else." She took a step closer, and for the first time he saw a flicker of the old Sophia, the passionate woman he had once loved beneath the polished exterior. "Let me tell you what Damien gave me," she said, her voice low and intense. "He saw me, not who he wanted me to be, but who I was. He listened when I talked about my dream of starting a foundation to fund literacy programs in underprivileged communities. You laughed at that idea. You called it a cute hobby. Damien saw it as a viable world-changing enterprise. He didn't fund it for me. He mentored me. He taught me how to write a business proposal, how to lobby for investors, how to manage a budget. The Blackwood Literacy Foundation now operates in 12 states, Ethan. I built that. My ambition wasn't lacking. Your vision was. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his self-deception. He had not only underestimated her, he had actively tried to suppress the very qualities that had now allowed her to flourish. The difference between you and him, she continued, is that you wanted a woman who would stand behind you and applaud your success. Damien wanted a woman who would stand beside him as his equal. I wasn't the one who was too small, Ethan. Your idea of a partnership was. Just then, a calm voice cut through the tension. Is everything all right here, my love? Damien had appeared at her side, his presence instantly changing the dynamic. He didn't look at Ethan with anger, but with a cool, protective assessment. His hand found Sophia's, their fingers lacing together naturally. Everything is fine, darling, Sophia said, her body relaxing into his side. Ethan and I were just catching up. Damien's gaze shifted to Ethan. The quiet power in his eyes was more unnerving than any open threat. It was the look of a man who owned the board, the pieces, and the room the game was being played in. Mr. Cole, Damien said, his tone level, I am a firm believer that the past should remain there. Sophia is my wife, and her happiness is my primary concern. I trust this conversation has contributed to that. It was a dismissal, wrapped in the thinnest veneer of civility. It was an unmistakable message, you are done here. Ethan felt a hot flush of shame and impotence. He was completely outmaneuvered, outclassed and outmatched. He had come over here seeking what? An explanation, an apology, a chance to reassert some form of dominance. Instead, he had been handed a comprehensive and devastating summary of his own failures as a man. Yes, of course, Ethan muttered, taking a step back. Congratulations to you both. He turned and walked away, not daring to look back. He felt their eyes on him, a unified front of quiet strength. He headed straight for the bar, ignoring Brittany, who was watching him from across the room with a look of pure fury. He needed more scotch. He needed to drown out the sound of Sophia's words, the truth that was now screaming in his ears. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a queen because he had been too small a man to recognize her crown. The rest of the wedding reception passed in a hazy, alcohol-fueled nightmare for Ethan. He avoided the dance floor, avoided conversation, and most of all, avoided looking in Sophia and Damien's direction. He found a seat at an empty table in the back of the hall and proceeded to drink methodically and with a grim sense of purpose. Each sip of scotch was a futile attempt to silence the voice of regret that had taken up permanent residence in his head. Brittany, however, was not one to be ignored. After about an hour of his self-imposed exile, she marched over to his table, her movements sharp and angry. She slammed her clutch purse down on the table, the sound making him jump. That's it, she said, her voice a low, controlled fury. We're leaving. The wedding's not over, he mumbled, gesturing with his glass. Oh, it is for us, she snapped. Do you have any idea the spectacle you've made of yourself? Of us first, you spend the evening hiding in a corner, like a punished child. Then you go and confront her. I saw you, Ethan. I saw the way her new husband came and put you in your place, like you were nothing, and you just stood there and took it. You don't understand what was said. He shot back his own anger, rising to meet hers. I don't need to. I understand what it looked like. It looked like my fiancé is still pathetically obsessed with the ex-wife he claimed was a nobody. It looked like you're jealous. It looked weak. The word weak hung in the air between them, an accusation more potent than any other. Ethan's entire self-image was built on the foundation of being strong, decisive, a winner. To be called weak by the woman he'd chosen, specifically to reflect his strength, was the ultimate insult. "Don't talk to me about weakness," he sneered, the alcohol making him reckless. "You're the one who can't stop talking about her husband's money. You're the one who sees people as networking opportunities." "And you don't," she scoffed, leaning forward, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare try to take the moral high ground with me, Ethan. Your whole life is a networking opportunity. Our whole relationship is a networking opportunity. You chose me because I look good on your arm and on your social media feed. Because I fit the brand. Don't pretend this is some grand romance." The brutal honesty of her words sobered him slightly. She was right. He had chosen her as an accessory, the same way he'd chosen his car and his penthouse. He had just never expected the accessory to call him out on it. "This is not the time or the place," he said, trying to regain control. "No, it's the perfect time and place," she hissed, "because I'm looking at her, and I'm looking at you, and I'm looking at me, and the math isn't adding up. You told me a story about who you were and what you wanted, and it was all a lie. You didn't leave her to find something better. You left her because you were too stupid to realize you already had it. And that insecurity is a stench I can smell all the way from here." She stood up, grabbing her purse. "I'm getting a car. I'll wait for you outside. You have 5 minutes to pull yourself together before I leave you here." She walked away without a backward glance, her stilettos clicking, an angry rhythm on the polished floor. Ethan sat there stunned. The cracks in his perfect, curated life had become gaping chasms. Brittany had seen right through him, not because she was particularly insightful, but because his facade had been so utterly demolished that even she could see the pathetic, insecure man hiding behind it. Their relationship, which he'd seen as a symbol of his success, was just as hollow as he was. It was a business arrangement, and tonight he had proven himself to be a very bad investment. He finished his drink and stood up, his legs unsteady. As he made his way towards the exit, his path inadvertently took him past the dance floor. The band was playing a slow romantic ballad, and there, in the center of the floor, were Damien and Sophia. They were dancing, moving as one, lost in their own world. Damien was whispering something in her ear, and she tilted her head back and laughed the same genuine, beautiful laugh he'd heard earlier. He watched as Damien's hand rested on her waist, his thumb stroking the silk of her dress. It was a gesture of such profound love and tenderness that it physically hurt Ethan to watch. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about the status. This was about connection. It was about a man who saw the universe in a woman, and a woman who felt safe enough to shine like the sun. It was everything he and Sophia never had because he had been incapable of it. And it was everything he and Brittany would never have because their foundation was built on sand. He turned away and walked out of the hall, out of the wedding, and into the cool, indifferent night. He felt a profound and desolate loneliness, the kind that comes from the absolute certainty of having made a life-altering, irreversible mistake. The gilded cage he had worked so hard to build for himself was now his prison, and he had just been handed a life sentence. Brittany was waiting by the valet stand, her arms crossed, her expression unforgiving. The ride back to the hotel would be silent, but Ethan knew a louder, more painful argument was on the horizon. His perfect life was officially over. The days following the wedding were a tense Cold War. Ethan and Brittany flew back to the city in near total silence. The air in their shared penthouse, once a symbol of their modern successful life, was now thick with resentment. Brittany spent her time locked in her home office, communicating with Ethan through curt, clipped text messages. He knew she was reassessing her brand, and he was painfully aware that he was now a liability to it. Ethan tried to throw himself back into work, hoping the familiar rhythms of spreadsheets and conference calls could drown out the memory of the wedding. But even there, the ghost of Damien Blackwood loomed. The world of finance and tech was small. Blackwood's name was everywhere: a new acquisition, a groundbreaking patent, a keynote speech that shifted market sentiment. Before, Ethan had seen these as distant events in a world above his own. Now, they felt deeply personally humiliating. About 2 weeks after the wedding, Ethan walked into his Monday morning team meeting, coffee in hand, ready to outline the quarterly strategy. His boss, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David, called the room to order. "All right, everyone, settle down." David began, his tone unusually grave. "Before we get to the quarterly projections, I have some major company news. As of 7 a.m. this morning, a deal was finalized. Our parent company, Viridian Holdings, has been acquired." A murmur went through the room. Acquisitions could mean anything from promotions and new resources to mass layoffs. "Acquired by who?" someone asked. David took a deep breath. "By Blackwood Capital." The name slammed into Ethan with the force of a battering ram. He felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. Of all the investment firms, of all the capital groups in the world, it had to be his. Damien Blackwood's private investment and venture capital firm. Blackwood's firm has been looking to expand its fintech portfolio for a while now. David continued, oblivious to Ethan's internal collapse. "This is an incredible opportunity for us. The resources, the technology, the network we now have access to, it's a game changer." Damien Blackwood himself will be addressing the senior leadership via video conference on Wednesday. The rest of the meeting was a drone in Ethan's ears. His colleagues were buzzing with excitement, speculating about the future, about the potential for growth. All Ethan could think about was the exquisite, soul-crushing irony. He had built his career at this company. It was the source of his pride, the proof that he was a serious, successful man. And now it belonged to Damien Blackwood. He would be, in effect, working for Sophia's husband. He stumbled back to his office, closing the door and sinking into his chair. Was this personal? Was it a calculated move, a power play designed to grind him under the heel of Blackwood's boot? He tried to imagine Damien and Sophia sitting in their mansion, laughing as they planned this. "Let's buy the company where her pathetic ex-husband works. It'll be amusing." But as the initial shock subsided, a colder, more devastating realization took its place. It wasn't personal. That was the truly galling part. To Damien Blackwood, Ethan's company was just another asset on a balance sheet, a strategic acquisition to strengthen a portfolio. Ethan Cole himself was probably not even a name Damien remembered from the wedding. He was a footnote, an insignificant detail in the life of the woman Damien loved. The acquisition wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of complete and total indifference. He was so beneath Damien's notice that his entire professional life could be bought and sold without a second thought. That was the ultimate power play. When he got home that evening, the penthouse felt even colder and emptier than before. Brittany was in the living room packing a suitcase, not a weekend bag, a large, hard-shell suitcase. "What's this?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I'm moving out," she said, not looking at him. She was folding a silk blouse with meticulous, angry precision. "I'm going to stay at my sister's place for a while. Brittany, we can talk about this." "No, we can't," she said, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were cold. "I got a call from a friend at your company this afternoon. She told me the news about Blackwood Capital." "It's just business," he said weakly. "Everything is business, Ethan," she exclaimed, throwing the blouse into the suitcase. "Don't you get it yet? Perception is reality. The perception is that my fiancé is now, for all intents and purposes, working for his ex-wife's new husband, the man he foolishly left. It's not a good look. It's a pathetic look. And I will not have my life, my career, my brand associated with pathetic." There it was again, the brand. "So, that's it?" he asked. "After 2 years, you're just walking out." "I'm making a strategic decision," she corrected him, her voice dripping with the corporate jargon they both used to speak so fluently. "I'm cutting my losses on an investment that has proven to be a catastrophic failure. You're damaged goods, Ethan, and I can't afford the association." She snapped the suitcase shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. She walked over to the small table by the door, took off the large diamond ring, and placed it down with a soft click. "I believe this belongs to you," she said. She wheeled her suitcase to the door without looking back. "Goodbye, Ethan." The door closed behind her, the lock engaging with a final definitive thud. Ethan stood alone in the center of the vast living room, surrounded by the expensive minimalist furniture that suddenly felt like props on an empty stage. He looked at the ring on the table, a gaudy symbol of a future that had just been cancelled. In the space of 2 weeks, his entire world had been dismantled. His fiancée was gone. His professional autonomy was a sham. The carefully constructed identity of Ethan Cole, self-made man of success, had been exposed as a fragile, hollow shell, and the architects of his destruction hadn't even had to lift a finger. They were simply living their lives, and the sheer gravitational pull of their happiness and success had been enough to tear his flimsy universe apart. He was adrift, and for the first time in his adult life, he had no idea which way was up. Wednesday arrived with a sense of grim inevitability. Ethan sat in the main boardroom with the rest of the senior leadership staring at the large screen at the head of the table. He had barely slept his nights, filled with a revolving door of anxieties. The screen flickered to life, and Damien Blackwood's face appeared crisp and clear in high definition. He was in an office, but it looked less like a corporate suite and more like a comfortable, light-filled study, with books and what looked like a framed hand-drawn sketch on the wall behind him. "Good morning, everyone," Damien began, his voice as calm and authoritative as Ethan remembered. "I trust you've all been briefed on the acquisition. I want to start by saying that Blackwood Capital is not here to dismantle what you've built. We're here to enhance it." He spoke for 20 minutes about synergy innovation and long-term growth strategies. He was articulate, visionary, and genuinely impressive. He laid out a future for the company that was more ambitious and exciting than anything David had ever proposed. There was no hint of gloating, no personal agenda. It was just business executed at the highest possible level. At the end of the presentation, he took a few questions. As David was thanking him, a woman's silhouette passed briefly in the background of Damien's video feed. She placed a cup of coffee on his desk, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. It was Sophia. Damien's expression softened for a split second as he looked up at her, a silent exchange passing between them before his professional demeanor returned. The image was seared into Ethan's brain. Sophia at home in the heart of this global empire, a quiet, integral part of it all. It wasn't a show of power, it was just a glimpse into their life, a life of shared partnership, quiet support, and immense, unshakable success. After the call ended, the boardroom was abuzz with energy. People were excited, energized by Damien's vision. Ethan felt nothing but a profound emptiness. He was a ghost at the feast. He knew he couldn't stay. He couldn't work for Damien Blackwood. He couldn't spend his days in an organization where his own personal failure was so deeply and structurally embedded. Every success for the company would be another reminder of what he had thrown away. That afternoon, he typed up his resignation. He kept it short and professional, citing a desire to pursue new opportunities. He handed it to David, who looked surprised but didn't press him. In a company now owned by Damien Blackwood, a man like Ethan Cole was easily replaceable. He spent the next few days packing up his office, the artifacts of his career feeling like relics from another man's life. On his last day, he walked out of the building and didn't look back. The weeks that followed were a long, slow descent. He put the penthouse on the market, knowing he could no longer afford it without his salary, and moved into a much smaller, anonymous apartment across town. The Porsche felt ridiculous parked in the standard-sized spot, a monument to his former hubris. He sold it, taking a significant loss. He tried networking, calling old contacts, but the news of his abrupt departure from a newly acquired high-profile company raised questions he couldn't answer. He was adrift, His professional identity erased his personal life, a wasteland. He was alone with his thoughts, and they were merciless, replaying every bad decision, every arrogant assumption, every moment of blindness that had led him to this point. The silence in his new apartment was deafening. There was no Brittany planning their next social engagement, no work calls to distract him. There was only the quiet and the crushing weight of his regret. One rainy Sunday afternoon, months later, he was browsing a bookstore, a habit he hadn't indulged in years. He was passing a display of new non-fiction when a book caught his eye. The cover was a simple, elegant design with the title opening the chapter, A New Model for Global Literacy. The author's name was printed in clean, bold letters below it, Sophia R. Blackwood. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. The author photo on the back flap was of the Sophia he'd seen at the wedding, poised, smiling her intelligent eyes, looking directly at the camera. The biography described her as the founder of the Blackwood Literacy Foundation and a leading advocate for educational reform. He bought the book. That night, he sat in his small, quiet apartment and read it from cover to cover. It was brilliant. It was insightful, well-researched, and passionately argued. It was the culmination of all the ideas she had tried to talk to him about years ago, the ones he had dismissed as cute hobbies. It was the work of a serious, powerful mind. Her mind. Closing the book, he finally understood. His downfall was not Damien Blackwood's fault. It was not Sophia's fault. It was his, and his alone. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had misjudged the very nature of success. He had chased the shimmering, hollow image of it, while she had quietly built the real thing. He would likely never see her again. Their worlds no longer intersected. She was on a trajectory that was stratospheric while he was on the ground starting over. But for the first time, the thought didn't fill him with bitterness or jealousy. It filled him with a strange, painful sense of clarity. He had been a chapter in her life, a prologue even, but she was now writing an epic novel. And his story. His story was about a man who had to lose everything to finally learn how to read. And so Ethan's story ends, not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. He thought he was the protagonist of a grand success story, only to realize he was a cautionary tale. It's a powerful reminder that the brightest futures are often built not on what we acquire, but on who we value and how we see them. True success isn't about flaunting a perfect life. It's about finding a partner who helps you build a meaningful one. Sophia found that not in wealth, but in a man who saw her worth all along. Ethan learned his lesson in the harshest way possible. What did you think of Ethan's journey? Was his downfall deserved? Or was he just a product of a world obsessed with appearances? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who appreciates a good drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that make you think. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening. The flash of 1,000 cameras can build a king or expose a fraud. For tech mogul Jasper Vaughan, tonight was supposed to be his coronation. On the glittering red carpet of the Met Gala, he stood with his new younger lover on his arm, the world at his feet. He had everything, the money, the fame, the woman. But what he didn't know was that across the city, the past he so carelessly buried was about to make a spectacular landing. The woman he'd left with nothing was about to arrive with everything, stepping off a billionaire's private jet and into the spotlight, ready to change the narrative forever. The air on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was electric, a heady cocktail of expensive perfume champagne and raw ambition. It was the first Monday in May, and the universe of the elite had converged. Jasper Vaughan, CEO of the tech behemoth Nexus Dynamics, felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. This was his Colosseum. Every camera flash was a validation, every fawning reporter a subject in his kingdom. On his arm, Sienna Monroe clung to him like couture ivy. She was 23, a supernova of Instagram fame, whose face was a perfect symmetrical mask of modern beauty. She wore a barely there diamond-encrusted gown by Mugler that was designed less for modesty and more for trending on Twitter. Her smile was blinding, but her eyes, whenever they weren't locked on a camera lens, held a flicker of deep-seated insecurity. She was his living trophy, a testament to his power to acquire the most beautiful things. Jasper over here, a question for Vogue. Jasper turned his own smile, practiced and predator-sharp. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, the fabric so dark it seemed to absorb the light around him. "Anything for you, Anna," he quipped, though the famous editor was nowhere near this particular scrum. It was a power play, a name drop to remind everyone of the circles he now moved in. "Sienna, you look breathtaking." "Who are you wearing?" a reporter from E! News shouted. "Mugler," she purred into the microphone, her voice a practiced, breathy whisper. "And my heart, of course, belongs to Jasper." Jasper squeezed her hand, a proprietary gesture. He loved this, the performance of it all. The world saw him as a visionary, a self-made showman who had clawed his way from a garage in Palo Alto to the pinnacle of global finance. They didn't see the wreckage he'd left behind. They didn't see the woman who had co-founded his dream in a cramped apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared belief in the future. They didn't see Ariella. Just the thought of her name was like a ghost at the feast. Ariella Vaughan, his wife of 12 years, the woman who knew the original code of his first successful app because she'd helped write it. The woman who'd mortgaged her inheritance, a modest but meaningful sum from her late parents, to fund his first server rack. The woman who had named Nexus Dynamics at their kitchen table, sketching the logo on a napkin while he'd been panicking about payroll. He had cut her out as surgically as a surgeon removes a benign tumor that he simply no longer finds attractive. The divorce had been brutal, swift and silent. He'd used the best lawyers money could buy, a team from Skadden Arps who had buried her in paperwork and non-disclosure agreements that gagged her for life. She had walked away with a settlement that was, for a man of his stature, insulting. A one-time payment that would allow her to live comfortably, but never to challenge him. The NDAs ensured she could never claim her intellectual property, never speak of her contributions, never tarnish the carefully constructed myth of Jasper Vaughan, the lone genius. He'd told her it was for her own good. "You wouldn't be happy in this world, Elle," he'd said, his voice laced with a cruel pity. "It's all so shallow. You're too real for it." And it was the ultimate gaslighting, framing his betrayal as an act of kindness. Jasper, there are rumors of a new acquisition. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal pressed, pulling him back to the present. "Are you looking to absorb the European tech firm, Ethelred?" Jasper's smile tightened. This was a sensitive topic. The Ethelred deal was his magnum opus, the final jewel in his corporate crown. "We're always exploring opportunities for growth. Nexus is about the future," he said, the perfect corporate non-answer. Sienna, bored with the business talk, tugged at his arm. "Darling, let's go inside. I'm dying for a glass of champagne." As he turned to lead her up the grand staircase, a strange shift occurred in the atmosphere. It was subtle at first, a murmur that rippled through the press line. A few photographers lowered their cameras, earpieces crackled, heads began to turn away from the museum steps and towards the street. "What's going on?" Sienna asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. Their spotlight was being stolen. Jasper followed their gaze. A motorcade of black Cadillac Escalades, the kind reserved for heads of state or the truly powerful, was pulling up, bypassing the designated drop-off zone and gliding to a halt directly in front of the red carpet's entrance. This was a breach of protocol, an audacious power move that even he wouldn't dare attempt. The lead security guard on the carpet, a man named Frank, who had seen it all, spoke into his wrist. "Whose convoy is this? They're not on the list." A collective hush fell over the crowd. The doors of the lead Escalade opened, but it wasn't a celebrity who stepped out. It was a team of security, clad in sharp, understated suits, who moved with an eerie, coordinated efficiency. They fanned out, creating a secure perimeter. Then the rear door of the third vehicle opened. A different kind of silence descended. It was a silence of shock and awe. The photographers, who had momentarily paused, suddenly went into a frenzy. The flashes became a single blinding strobe, a violent, percussive roar of light. The focus of the entire Met Gala, the epicenter of global media, had shifted in an instant. From the opulent darkness of the car, a single, elegant heel emerged. It was a Christian Louboutin, its red sole like a drop of blood against the asphalt. Then a leg, then the silhouette of a woman in a gown of deep emerald silk, a custom creation by Schiaparelli that was both a work of art and a suit of armor. Jasper's blood ran cold. He knew that posture. He knew that quiet, unshakable grace. It couldn't be. As she straightened to her full height, the light caught her face. Her mousy brown hair, which he'd always criticized, was now a rich, warm auburn, styled in elegant, cascading waves. Her face, once etched with the stress of supporting his dreams, was now serene and confident. She wore a necklace of Colombian emeralds and diamonds that probably cost more than the settlement he'd given her. It was Ariella, his Ariella. But she wasn't his anymore. She looked like a queen. He stood frozen halfway up the stairs, Sienna's grip on his arm suddenly feeling like a lead weight. The reporters were screaming her name now, their voices a chaotic mix of confusion and excitement. Ariella. Ariella Vaughan. Who are you with? Who are you wearing? Ariella didn't look at them. Her gaze was fixed forward, calm and deliberate. She turned back to the car and extended a hand. And the man who took it, stepping out to join her, was the reason the protocol had been broken. It was Alistair Finch, the reclusive, enigmatic billionaire, the man whose net worth made Jasper's look like pocket change. Alistair Finch, the founder of the Finch Foundation, a titan of industry in renewable energy and aerospace, a man who hadn't walked a red carpet in over a decade. He was the media's white whale, intensely private and impossibly powerful. He stood beside Ariella, his hand protectively on the small of her back. He wasn't smiling for the cameras. He was smiling at her. The Wall Street Journal reporter, who had been grilling Jasper just moments before, now sprinted down the stairs, microphone in hand, his face alight with the biggest scoop of his career. Mr. Finch, what an unexpected surprise. What brings you to the gala tonight? Alistair's voice when he spoke was calm and clear, cutting through the din. My partner, he said, his eyes still on Ariella, expressed an interest in the exhibit, and what Ariella wants, she gets. Partner. The word echoed across the plaza, amplified by 100 hot mics. It was a declaration. Jasper felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed world was tilting on its axis. On the grandest stage imaginable, his discarded past had just upstaged his triumphant present. And she hadn't arrived in a taxi. She'd arrived with the one man in the world he could never compete with. Sienna finally processed what was happening. Is that your ex-wife? She whispered, her voice a mix of disbelief and horror. Jasper couldn't answer. He could only watch as Ariella and Alistair began to walk towards the steps, parting the sea of reporters, like Moses parting the Red Sea. The cameras that had adored him seconds ago were now turned away completely, ignoring him and Sienna. They were old news. The real story was walking towards them. And as Ariella reached the bottom of the staircase, her eyes cool and composed, finally met his. There was no anger in them, no sadness. There was something far worse, indifference. It was the look of a woman who had not only moved on, but had ascended to a stratosphere he couldn't even fathom. The flashbulbs continued to pop, capturing the tableau for eternity. Jasper Vaughan, the new king, standing halfway to the top, forgotten, and Ariella, The woman he had erased standing at the bottom, poised to begin her ascent with a true emperor by her side. The world seemed to slow down, contracting to the space between the bottom and top of the grand staircase. For Jasper, it was a dizzying, nauseating vertigo. He and Sienna were frozen in place, suddenly transformed from the night's main event into awkward, overdressed statues. The roar of the press was a physical force, every shouted question for Ariella, a hammer blow to his ego. Ariella, your necklace is that from the Finch private collection. Mr. Finch, does this mean you're officially back in the public eye? Ariella, a comment for the Times. How does it feel to be back? Back! Jasper thought, a bitter laugh almost escaping his lips. She was never here in the first place. This wasn't her world. He had made sure of that. He had built the walls of this gilded cage himself, and he had been the one to lock her out. Ariella moved with a liquid grace he barely recognized. The woman he remembered would have been flustered by this level of attention, her shoulders slightly hunched, her gaze averted. This woman held her head high, her posture radiating a quiet power that was more commanding than any shout. The Schiaparelli gown, in a shade of emerald so deep it was almost black in the shadows, was a statement. It wasn't just a dress, it was armor, and its severe, elegant lines made Sienna's glittering see-through number look cheap and desperate by comparison. Alistair Finch was the perfect counterpoint to her newfound radiance. Dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored Brioni suit, he wore his power with an ease Jasper could only feign. He didn't crave the cameras, he tolerated them. His focus was entirely on Ariella. He would lean in to whisper something in her ear, and a small, genuine smile would touch her lips. The intimacy of the gesture performed on the world's most public stage was more potent than any passionate kiss. It spoke of a deep, unshakable connection. As they reached the base of the stairs, a path cleared for them. The security team moved with quiet precision. Jasper watched his jaw clenched as Anna Wintour herself, who had not deigned to greet him, descended the first few steps to personally welcome them. She embraced Ariella with a warmth that was famously reserved for only a chosen few. Ariella, my dear, Anna's voice was crisp and clear. You look magnificent. Alistair, you old rogue, I knew I could count on you to shake things up. Only for the right reasons, Anna, Alistair replied smoothly, his hand never leaving Ariella's back. It was then that Ariella's gaze lifted and swept past the fawning fashion icon, past the throng of reporters, and settled directly on Jasper. For a fraction of a second, the universe held its breath. The cool indifference he had seen from a distance was now up close, and it was infinitely more chilling. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with adoration, with hope, with heartbreak, now held nothing but a calm, placid emptiness. It was as if she were looking at a stranger, a piece of furniture that was inconveniently blocking her path. Sienna, recovering her wits, tried to reclaim the narrative. She tightened her grip on Jasper's arm and hissed, "Smile, Jasper. They're watching. Don't let her see she's getting to you." He forced the corners of his mouth to lift, but the expression felt like a death mask. Ariella and Alistair began their ascent. They had to walk past them. The four of them were on a collision course on the crimson-carpeted steps. The photographers held their breath, their fingers poised on the shutters, sensing the impending drama. Ariella's eyes flickered from Jasper to Sienna. She took in the younger woman's desperate beauty, the garish dress, the possessive hand on her ex-husband's arm. There was no judgment in her look, only a fleeting, almost clinical assessment. As they drew level, Jasper couldn't stop himself. The words tore out of him, a low, venomous whisper, meant only for her. "What is this, Elle? What kind of game are you playing?" Ariella paused. Her movement so slight it was almost imperceptible. She turned her head, her emerald earrings catching the light. Alistair stopped with her, his expression unreadable, but his presence a silent, immovable wall. She looked at Jasper, and for the first time that night, she spoke to him. Her voice was not the one he remembered, the one that would tremble during arguments or soften with affection. This voice was level cool and carried a resonance of newfound authority. Game, she repeated the word, tasting foreign on her tongue. There's no game, Jasper. She then looked him up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that mirrored his own countless dismissive glances from the past. This is just my life. It was a devastatingly simple sentence, yet it landed with the force of a physical blow. It reframed everything. His grand life, the one he had flaunted, was her game. Her new reality, calm and powerful, was simply her life. She didn't wait for a response. She gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod, a dismissal, and then turned to continue up the stairs. But Sienna, fueled by jealousy and the humiliation of being ignored, couldn't let it go. He made you know. She spat, her voice a shrill whisper that was just loud enough for those nearby to hear. You were nothing before him. Alistair Finch, who had remained silent, finally moved. He didn't look at Sienna. He didn't raise his voice. He simply shifted his body slightly, a subtle but unmistakable blocking maneuver, and looked down at Jasper. His eyes were like chips of ice. I believe, Alistair said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the noise. You and your guest are creating a scene. It would be wise to remember where you are, and more importantly, who you're speaking to. The implicit threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't about physical violence. It was about something far more terrifying to a man like Jasper, the complete and utter annihilation of his social and financial standing. Alistair Finch could crush Nexus Dynamics with a single phone call, blacklist him from every circle of power, and reduce his empire to dust. Jasper felt a tremor of genuine fear. He gave Sienna's arm a sharp tug, a silent command to shut up. Ariella was already several steps ahead, seemingly unfazed. She paused at the top of the landing framed by the grand entrance to the museum. She looked back, not at Jasper, but out over the sea of flashing lights, the city glittering behind her. She took a deep breath, as if savoring the air of a world that was finally her own. Then she and Alistair disappeared inside, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The spell was broken. The press, having captured their money shots, began to disperse or follow the real story inside. Jasper and Sienna were left alone on the stairs, the focus of the world having moved on as quickly as it had arrived. The energy, the adoration, the power, it had all evaporated. What was that? Sienna stammered, her fake confidence shattered. Who does she think she is? Jasper finally looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see a trophy. He saw a liability. He saw a shallow, foolish girl who had just provoked one of the most powerful men on the planet. He saw a pale imitation of the substance he had thrown away. Get inside, he ordered, his voice flat and dead, and don't speak to anyone. He left her there and stalked towards the entrance, his mind racing. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a calculated move. The location, the timing, the choice of escort, it was all designed for maximum impact. Ariella, the quiet, compliant, real woman he had patronized, had just executed a public relations coup that would make the most seasoned Hollywood publicist weep with envy. But how? How did she get to Alistair Finch? The man was a ghost. He didn't do partners. He'd do partners. And why now? As he stepped into the museum's great hall, the enormity of what had just happened began to sink in. He had come here tonight to celebrate his victory, to put the final stamp on his new life. Instead, the prologue to a whole new war had just been written. And this time, he had a terrifying feeling he was no longer the main character. He was the villain. And every villain, sooner or later, faces a reckoning. The inside of the Met was a swirling vortex of high society. The din of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet filled the air. But for Jasper, it was all background noise. He moved through the throngs of celebrities and power brokers, like a phantom, his mind replaying the scene on the steps in a torturous loop. Everywhere he looked, he saw people huddled together, whispering. He caught snippets of conversation. Did you see Ariella Vaughan? With Alistair Finch, can you believe it? The look on Jasper's face. That Schiaparelli gown was a declaration of war. He was the subject of gossip of pity. It was intolerable. He found Sienna near the champagne fountain, already on her second glass, looking sullen and out of her depth. I can't believe her, Sienna muttered, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Ariella. She planned that. She did it just to humiliate you, to humiliate us. Stop talking, Jasper commanded, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and downing it in 2 gulps. His mind was a maelstrom of rage and confusion. Sienna's simplistic analysis was both right and wrong. Of course, it was planned, but the Ariella he knew wouldn't have concocted such a scheme for petty revenge. There had to be something more, a deeper strategy at play that he couldn't yet see. His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen was a cascade of notifications. News alerts from Bloomberg, the New York Times, Forbes. His own PR head, a bulldog of a man named Marcus, was calling him repeatedly. He ignored it. He knew what they would say. He swiped to a browser and typed in Ariella's name. The results, which hours ago would have shown a few old forgotten photos of them together and a link to a defunct pottery blog she once kept, were now exploding. Ariella Vaughan was trending worldwide. Articles were already being written. Speculative pieces titled The Phoenix, Who is Ariella Vaughan? Alistair Finch's Mystery Woman Revealed. And most damningly, the ultimate power move as tech CO debuts new love his ex-wife arrives with a titan. He felt a wave of impotent fury. He had spent millions curating his public image, crafting a narrative of solitary genius. In the space of 10 minutes, Ariella had hijacked it, rewritten it, and made him a secondary character in his own life story. He needed to understand. How did she, with her limited resources and non-existent connections, get into the orbit of Alistair Finch? The man was more myth than reality, living on a private island in the Caribbean and communicating with the world through his foundation. He didn't attend parties. He didn't date. He certainly didn't escort jilted ex-wives to the Met Gala. A memory surfaced unbidden. It was from about 6 months ago, during the final ugly stages of their divorce proceedings. His legal team was presenting him with the NDA they had drafted for Ariella. It's ironclad Mr. Vaughan, the lead attorney, a slick corporate shark named Peterson, had assured him. She can't discuss the company's formation, her involvement. The initial seed money, nothing. Her name is effectively erased from the corporate history of Nexus Dynamics. Good, Jasper had said. She'll sign it. She's fighting it on one small point, Peterson had replied, looking down at his notes. It's odd. She's not asking for more money. She's insisting on a clause that releases her from any non-compete obligations specifically related to European tech firms, particularly those specializing in sustainable data solutions. Jasper had scoffed. Let her have it. What's she going to do? Start a rival company from her one-bedroom apartment. Give her the crumb. It will make her feel like she won something. And he saw it now. It wasn't a crumb. It was a key. Ethelred, the European firm he was trying to acquire. Their specialty. Sustainable data solutions. The very company the WSJ reporter had asked him about. The connection clicked into place with the force of a thunderclap. This wasn't about the Met Gala. This wasn't about Sienna. This was about Ethelred. He grabbed Sienna's arm, his fingers digging into her skin. We're leaving. But we just got here, she protested, whining. I wanted to get a photo with Zendaya. Now, he snarled, dragging her towards a side exit, ignoring the curious stares. The moment they were in the back of his Maybach, he was on the phone with Marcus. What the hell is going on, Jasper? Marcus's voice was frantic. My phone has melted. The board is calling. The narrative is out of control. They're painting you as the villain who threw away a diamond and picked up a piece of glass. Forget the narrative, Jasper barked, his voice raw. I need you to dig. I need to know everything about Ariella Vaughan and Alistair Finch. Not the public crap. I need to know when they met, how they met, what their connection is. And I need to know Finch's position on my Ethelred acquisition. Now. He hung up, his heart pounding against his ribs. The dots were connecting into a terrifying picture. Meanwhile, in a quiet private suite overlooking the museum's sculpture garden, Ariella Vaughan took a sip of water, her hand perfectly steady. Alistair sat opposite her in a plush armchair, observing her with a warm, approving gaze. The chaos of the red carpet felt a world away. You were magnificent, Alistair said, his voice a low, calming rumble. Poised, powerful. You didn't flinch. A small, wry smile touched Ariella's lips. I was terrified, Alistair. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. I would never have known, he said. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. You were very courageous tonight. Her journey to this moment had not been one of revenge, but of survival. After the divorce, she had been adrift in a sea of grief and betrayal. The man she had loved and built a life with had discarded her as if she were a piece of obsolete hardware. The settlement, while enough to live on, was a constant, insulting reminder of how little he valued her contributions. For months, she had done nothing, paralyzed by the sheer injustice of it all. The NDA she had been forced to sign was a gag, silencing her history, erasing her truth. The turning point had come late one night. She was staring at the business section of a newspaper at a glowing profile of Jasper that described him as a lone visionary. The rage that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. But it wasn't a destructive rage. It was clarifying. It burned away the grief and left behind a cold, hard resolve. He had taken her past, so she would have to build a new future. She remembered the clause she had fought for in the divorce, the one Jasper had dismissed so arrogantly. She had insisted on it because she had been the one to first identify Ethelred as a potential acquisition target for Nexus years ago. She was the one who saw the genius in their sustainable data cooling technology, a field Jasper had deemed a niche, non-profitable distraction. She knew their value better than anyone. She couldn't compete with Nexus, but perhaps she could consult for its competition. Using the last of her savings, she flew to Berlin, the headquarters of Ethelred. She didn't ask for a job. She asked for one meeting offering a free 1-hour consultation on how to counter a hostile takeover from an American tech giant like Nexus Dynamics. She knew Jasper's playbook because she had helped him write it. The German executives, initially skeptical of this unknown American woman, were stunned by her incisive analysis, her intimate knowledge of Nexus's operational weaknesses, and Jasper's psychological blind spots. They offered her a consulting contract on the spot. It was during her work with Ethelred that she came onto Alistair Finch's radar. Finch's foundation was a major silent investor in Ethelred, drawn to its green technology. When he heard that a mysterious consultant named Ariella Vaughan was the mastermind behind Ethelred's brilliant defense strategy against the Nexus takeover bid, he had been intrigued. He summoned her to a meeting. He had expected a hardened corporate mercenary. Instead, he found a brilliant, dignified woman with a quiet fire in her eyes. He wasn't interested in the gossip of her past, but in the clarity of her vision for the future. They met to talk about business, but they ended up talking about everything. Art, philosophy, the ethics of technology, the burden of immense success. He saw in her a partner, not in a romantic sense, at least not at first, but an intellectual and spiritual equal. He saw the architect that Jasper had tried to erase. When he learned the full story of her involvement with Nexus and the gag order she was under, his intrigue turned to a cold fury. Alistair Finch was a man who detested bullies and credit thieves. He didn't just divorce you, Ariella, he had said to her one evening at his estate. He committed an act of historical erasure. He stole your legacy. The NDA is unbreakable, she had replied, a familiar wave of hopelessness washing over her. I can never tell my story. Alistair had leaned forward, his eyes intense. An NDA prevents you from speaking. It does not prevent you from being. You don't have to tell the world you're brilliant, Ariella. You just have to show them. You don't have to talk about your power. You just have to demonstrate it. We will not break the NDA. We will make it irrelevant. And so the plan was born. It was not about revenge. It was about reclamation. The Met Gala was not the endgame. It was the opening move. It was a signal to the world, and specifically to Jasper, that Ariella was no longer a ghost. She was a player, and she was now backed by a king. Jasper knows now. Ariella said, her gaze distant. He's not stupid. He'll have connected me to Ethelred. He'll be digging. Let him dig, Alistair said, with a calm smile. He'll only find what I want him to find, that you are the lead strategic consultant for Ethelred's defense, and that my foundation is increasing its stake in the company with you being appointed to the board of directors next month. Ariella took a deep breath. Board of Directors. The title felt immense, terrifying, and exhilarating. He will fight dirty, she warned. He will come after me. He'll use the press. He'll try to smear my name. I know, Alistair said. His expression grew serious. And that is the next phase of our strategy. We've shown them your power. Now we will show them your character. Let him sling his mud. We will be ready. He stood up and offered her his hand. But for tonight, let's not talk about Jasper. Let's go and look at some art. Let's allow the world to see you simply enjoying your life. There is no greater victory than that. She took his hand, and for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The war was far from over, but for the first time she was on solid ground with an ally who didn't just see her as a support system, but as the architect herself. And together, they were about to draw up the blueprints for Jasper Vaughan's downfall. The fallout from the Met Gala was swift and brutal. Jasper Vaughan, a man accustomed to controlling the narrative, found himself caught in a tsunami of public opinion he could not command. His PR team worked around the clock, but it was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. The image of Ariella poised and powerful next to the enigmatic Alistair Finch was seared into the public consciousness. It was a story of rebirth and empowerment, and in that story, Jasper was cast as the villain. His first move was a calculated leak to a friendly gossip columnist at page 6. The story planted by Marcus painted Ariella as a bitter ex-wife who had seduced an aging, reclusive billionaire in a desperate act of revenge. It hinted at mental instability, at an obsession with her ex-husband's success. It was a classic, misogynistic smear designed to discredit her and reframe her appearance as pathetic rather than powerful. The article ran, but it didn't have the intended effect. Instead of swaying public opinion, it backfired. Feminist commentators and online forums immediately decried it as a transparent attempt to silence a woman who had clearly leveled up. Social media exploded with hashtags like #TeamAriella and #Vindicated People saw the story for what it was, the desperate flailing of a man whose ego had been wounded. Sienna, meanwhile, was becoming a significant problem. The public humiliation had cracked her carefully constructed facade. She vacillated between fits of rage, accusing Jasper of not protecting her, and bouts of weeping insecurity. Her social media, once a stream of glamorous selfies and sponsored posts, became erratic. She posted and deleted cryptic quotes about loyalty and betrayal. She was a loose cannon, and Jasper, whose life was built on meticulous control, found her emotional chaos unbearable. "You need to get a grip," he snapped at her one morning in his sterile glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. She was crying because a designer had indefinitely postponed a collaboration with her, a clear sign that her brand was now tainted by his bad press. "A grip!" she shrieked, her mascara running. "My career is being ruined because your ex-wife decided to play Cinderfucking-Rella. And what are you doing about it? Nothing. That stupid article made things worse." The article was a strategic misstep, he conceded through gritted teeth. "We're moving on to phase two." Phase two was far more ruthless. Unable to win in the court of public opinion, Jasper decided to attack where he felt Ariella was truly vulnerable: her professional credibility and the Ethelred deal. He called an emergency meeting with his M&A team. "Forget the charm offensive," he ordered, pacing his boardroom. The skyline of New York was his backdrop, but it offered no comfort. "We're going hostile. I want to initiate a proxy battle for Ethelred. We'll go directly to their shareholders, and I want our opposition research team to dig into every single aspect of their board and key consultants, specifically Ariella Vaughan." He intended to find a weakness, a mistake, a skeleton in her closet, anything he could use to disqualify her, to paint her as incompetent or corrupt. He wanted to prove to Alistair Finch that he had backed the wrong horse. He wanted to destroy the foundation of her new life. His researchers worked for weeks, but they came up empty. Ariella's life had been utterly scandal-free. Her work for Ethelred was by all accounts exemplary. The company's stock had risen steadily since her involvement. She was a ghost in terms of leverage. "There's nothing," Jasper, his head of research, reported, looking nervous. "She has no debt, no shady dealings, no disgruntled former colleagues. Her record is pristine. It's almost unnatural." The pristine nature of her past only fueled Jasper's paranoia. No one was that clean. He became obsessed, spending late nights personally sifting through documents, old emails, anything that might provide a clue. His work at Nexus began to suffer. He was distracted, volatile, his judgment clouded by his personal vendetta. The proxy battle for Ethelred was becoming uglier and more expensive by the day. Jasper's team released statements questioning Ethelred's leadership and financial stability. But Ethelred, guided by Ariella's strategy and backed by Finch's immense capital, countered every move with calm, factual rebuttals. They portrayed Nexus Dynamics as a corporate raider trying to crush a smaller, innovative European competitor. The European press, and even some American financial journalists, began to side with Ethelred. Jasper was losing, and as he lost, he grew more desperate. In Berlin, Ariella watched Jasper's machinations with a sense of grim predictability. She and Alistair had anticipated this. "He's playing his old game," she told Alistair during one of their daily video conferences. She was in Ethelred's sleek, minimalist boardroom, while he was in his study, half a world away. "When he can't win on merit, he tries to destroy his opponent's character. And in doing so, he is revealing his own." Alistair replied, his voice calm. "He is over-leveraging Nexus. His board must be getting nervous. His obsession is making him reckless. Let him continue." But Ariella knew there was another angle Jasper would eventually try, a more personal one. The call came one afternoon. It was from her younger sister Chloe, a gentle soul who worked as an elementary school teacher in Ohio. Chloe was crying. "Ellie, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't know what to do." "Chloe, slow down. What is it? What happened?" Ariella asked, her blood turning to ice. "A man came to see me," Chloe explained between sobs. "A lawyer, I think. He said he represented Jasper. He started asking questions about Mum and Dad's inheritance. The money you used to, you know." Ariella felt the air leave her lungs. The seed money, the small inheritance from her parents that she had given Jasper to start his company all those years ago. It had been a gift given out of love and belief. There was no paperwork, no loan agreement, just a wife's faith in her husband. "He was asking if there were any documents," Chloe continued, "if you ever called it a loan. He said He said if you were trying to claim any stake in Nexus based on that money, Jasper would sue you for fraud. He said he would sue me for conspiring with you. He mentioned my teaching license, Ellie. He threatened my job. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty of it took Ariella's breath away. He wasn't just coming after her. He was threatening her family. He was trying to poison the purest, most selfless act of her life and turn it into a weapon against her. Listen to me, Chloe, Ariella said, her voice shaking but firm. You have done nothing wrong. This is a scare tactic. He is a bully and a coward. Do not speak to this man again. If he contacts you, you hang up. Understand? After calming her sister down, Ariella hung up the phone, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a wave of true, white-hot fury. This crossed a line. This was no longer business. This was personal. She immediately called Alistair. She recounted the conversation, her voice tight with rage. For a long moment there was silence on the other end of the line. When Alistair finally spoke, his voice had lost its customary calm. It was replaced by something cold and hard as steel. He has made a grave error, Ariella, he said slowly. He has mistaken our restraint for weakness. He believes this is a game of corporate chess. He has forgotten that in real life, when you threaten a person's family, the rules change. What do we do? Ariella asked, her mind racing. For years, you have honored an agreement that has silenced you and erased your history, Alistair said. That NDA was designed to protect his reputation and his assets, but he has now threatened your family in an attempt to further leverage a company you helped build. In my opinion, that constitutes a material breach of good faith. The agreement was predicated on a quiet separation. This is an act of aggression. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He's been digging into your past for a weakness. I think it's time we took a closer look at his. Not his personal life, his professional one. Specifically, the origins of Nexus Dynamics. You said the original code was a joint effort, that the business plan was conceived together. Yes, Ariella said quietly. But I have no proof. It was all on old laptops on napkins. It's gone. Is it? Alistair asked, a new dangerous edge to his voice. Jasper is arrogant, but he's also a digital pack rat. He never deletes anything. He sees it all as part of his legend. The original servers, the first lines of code, they're his origin story. He'll have them backed up somewhere in a digital archive he thinks no one can touch. Bullies always keep trophies of their conquests. Alistair continued, I am going to authorize a full-scale digital forensic investigation. We're not hacking him. We are going to legally subpoena the digital archives of Nexus Dynamics as part of the discovery process for the proxy battle. He's accusing Ethelred's consultant you of being unqualified. We will counter that your qualifications are so profound that you were in fact the uncredited co-founder of his own company. We will force him to open his books, his files, his entire digital history. Let's see how the myth of the lone genius holds up under a federal subpoena. Ariella felt a jolt, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it, the point of no return. He will fight it, she said. And he will lose, Alistair countered, because he has something to hide, and we, my dear Ariella, are about to bring it into the light. He wanted to dig into your past fine. Let's show him what a real archaeological excavation looks like, so. The battle for Ethelred was about to become secondary. The real war, the war for the truth of Nexus Dynamics, was about to begin. And somewhere in a climate-controlled high-security server farm, the ghost on the napkin was waiting to be resurrected. The legal battle over the Ethelred proxy fight transformed into a direct assault on Jasper's history. Alistair's legal team from Quinn Emanuel filed a subpoena demanding access to Nexus Dynamics' earliest digital archives, arguing that Ariella's qualifications, and thus her competence as a consultant for Ethelred, were rooted in her uncredited role as a co-founder. Jasper's lawyers fought back with frantic energy, decrying the move as an invasive fishing expedition designed to steal trade secrets. They filed motion after motion, but their desperation was transparent. He's stalling, Ariella observed to Alistair from their London war room. The more he fights this, the more certain I am that the proof is in there. His resistance is the tell, Alistair agreed. He's bluffing with a bad hand. It's time to call. Alistair's lawyers were relentless, and the judge, a sharp woman named Atherton, saw through the smokescreen. She granted a court-supervised forensic analysis of Nexus's archives, limited to the company's first 2 years. The news sent Jasper into a spiral of fury and paranoia. His carefully constructed past was about to be excavated. He became a ghost haunting his own company, his legendary focus shattered by the dread of what the forensic team might find in the digital tomb of his old hard drives. Weeks of tense silence followed as the experts sifted through terabytes of old data. For Ariella, the waiting was agonizing, but also clarifying. She poured her energy into her work, with Ethelred building her future, while the truth of her past was being unearthed. The breakthrough came on a grey Tuesday afternoon. An urgent call from Alistair's lead lawyer pulled her from a meeting. "We found it." The lawyer's voice was electric. "It's better than we could have possibly hoped." Ariella sank into a chair, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He's an obsessive archivist of his own genius," the lawyer explained, a note of incredulous laughter in his voice. "Buried in a backup from a 2010 home PC, we found a scanned file. Jasper was so narcissistic that he actually scanned the napkin." The napkin, from their old kitchen table. Ariella felt the air leave her lungs. On that flimsy piece of paper, in her own distinctive handwriting, was the flowchart for the app's core interface, and circled at the top, the name she had invented, Nexus. "But that's not the knockout punch," the lawyer continued, his voice dropping for dramatic effect. "In the same folder, there's a draft of the email he wrote to his first investor. He never sent this version. In it he states, and I am quoting directly, 'My partner and I have developed a revolutionary new platform. She is the architectural visionary behind the concept, while I am handling the business development and coding execution.' He had written it himself. The unvarnished truth, saved in a moment of candor before his ego rewrote history. He had documented his own lie. "He erased you, Ariella," the lawyer said softly, "and now the evidence of that erasure will be his undoing." The documents were filed under seal, and the effect was seismic. When Jasper's lawyers informed him of the discovery, his world imploded. His legal case was not just compromised, it was annihilated. He was facing perjury charges and a lawsuit from Ariella that the now fraudulent NDA could no longer protect him from. The consequences were immediate. The proxy battle for Ethelred was over. He withdrew the bid in a humiliating public defeat, sending Nexus stock into a freefall. The board, furious at his reckless and costly vendetta, called an emergency meeting. That evening, while Jasper was locked in his office trying to stop the hemorrhaging, Sienna saw the truth. She was tied to a sinking ship, not a king. She quietly packed her jewelry and designer clothes and slipped out of the penthouse, disappearing from his life as silently as she had entered it. When Jasper finally emerged, defeated and broken, the cavernous apartment was silent. He was utterly alone. Across the Atlantic, Ariella stood on a balcony overlooking the London night. Alistair had flown in the moment he'd heard the news and now stood beside her. "It's over," she whispered, the words heavy with the weight of a long and painful journey. "No," Alistair corrected her, gently taking her hand. His presence was a warm, solid anchor in the swirl of events. "It's just beginning. You're free, Ariella. The gag is off. Your history is now yours to claim." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the city lights. The ghost on the napkin hadn't just exposed a lie, it had resurrected her truth. The war for her past was won. Now the campaign for her future could truly begin. The dam of Jasper's lies broke spectacularly. Once the court documents were unsealed, the story of the ghost on the napkin became a global sensation. The irrefutable proof of Ariella's foundational role, the scanned napkin, and the draft email admitting she was the architectural visionary, wasn't just a legal smoking gun. It was a devastating narrative. The reckoning for Jasper Vaughan was swift and total. The emergency board meeting was less a discussion than an execution. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud, a collapsed acquisition, and a stock price in freefall, they voted unanimously to oust him as CEO of the company he had stolen. His assets were frozen shareholder lawsuits piled up, and the CCC launched a formal investigation. His professional world evaporated. His personal world followed suit. Sienna Monroe, seeing her patron's power vanish quietly, packed her designer bags and disappeared, leaving him utterly alone in the wreckage. Jasper became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms he once commanded. In stark contrast, Ariella's star ascended. She became a symbol of vindication. The media clamored for interviews, but she refused to engage in the salacious post-mortem of Jasper's career. She was not interested in revenge, only reclamation. She chose a single stage to tell her story, a keynote address at the Women in Tech Global Conference. In front of thousands, she spoke not of her personal pain, but of the creative passion that had once fueled Nexus. She framed her experience as one of many, a story of the countless women whose vital contributions have been systematically erased from the annals of innovation. Then, she delivered her masterstroke. She announced that her monumental settlement from Jasper, which gave her a significant minority stake in the company she co-founded, would be the seed capital for a new venture. For too long, history has been written by those who hold the pen, not those who had the idea. She declared, her voice resonating with quiet authority. That is why I'm announcing the formation of the Archimedes Foundation. Its mission is simple: to find, fund, and champion the unsung architects of our future. We will provide the capital and legal support to ensure their legacies are protected and their contributions are never again left as ghosts on a napkin. The ovation was immediate and overwhelming. In the front row, Alistair Finch watched not as a savior, but as a proud partner. He had provided the means for her to fight, but this victory, this transformation from victim to leader, was hers alone. Weeks later, after the final papers were signed, Ariella found herself walking near the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the site of her public re-emergence. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. Her phone rang with an unknown number. She answered. Ariella. The voice was a hoarse, broken version of Jasper's. I saw the news about the foundation. He paused, the silence heavy with all that was unsaid. It was always yours, wasn't it, the name? Nexus. It was the closest he could get to an admission, a final self-serving grasp for absolution. Ariella listened to the sounds of the city around her, a city that was no longer his, but a landscape of her own making. The anger and hurt were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. She had already moved on. Yes, it was, she said simply, her voice calm and final. Goodbye, Jasper. She ended the call before he could answer. She didn't need to hear another word. His chapter was finished. Slipping the phone into her pocket, Ariella Vaughan turned away from the museum and walked into the bright, clear afternoon, the sole architect of the brilliant future that lay ahead. And that's the incredible story of how a single moment on a red carpet can trigger an avalanche of truth and justice. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about the spotlight you command, but the integrity you hold when no one is watching. Ariella Vaughan's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming a history that was stolen from her and using her newfound power to build a better future for others. It shows us that, even when you're silenced, your truth has a way of coming to light. What do you think? Was Ariella's move at the Met Gala a brilliant act of empowerment or a cold, calculated strike? Who was the real villain in this story? Beyond just Jasper. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of epic comebacks and justice served, drop a justice for Ariella in the comments section. And as always, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true life dramas. Thanks for listening.